The Minneapolis police officer involved in the death of George Floyd was charged Friday with third-degree murder and manslaughter. The charging decision came after days of protests and violent rioting across the Twin Cities, where much of the destruction centered around the police department's 3rd precinct in Minneapolis. Protesters also camped out in front of Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman's house, continuously clamored for justice and prosecution of the police for yet another senseless killing of a black man by a white officer. Speaking Friday afternoon, Freeman said he was not insensitive to the riots and protests that have caused looting, fires and chaos across the Twin Cities since Floyd's death, and that he and investigators worked as hard and fast as they could to reach the decision. Additional and more severe charges could follow. We have now been able to put together the evidence we need. Even as late as yesterday afternoon, we didn't have all we needed. We have now found it, and we felt the responsibility to charge it as soon as we could," Freeman said. Officials around the metro commended the charge as the first stop in hopefully helping to restore peace. The other 3 Minneapolis officers at the scene Monday when Floyd died have not been charged, but Freeman said he expected criminal complaints against them to be forthcoming. He would not say what charges are being considered for those officers. All 4 were fired from the Minneapolis Police Department earlier this week. Officer Derek Chauvin was seen on video taken by a bystander pinning Floyd to the ground with his knee to Floyd's neck for several minutes. Police were called to a convenience store near 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis after Floyd allegedly tried to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. Floyd is seen handcuffed and lying face down while he pleads, "Please. I can't breathe." The charges against Chauvin are the same as those brought against former Minneapolis police officer Muhammad Noor in the death of Justine Damond in 2017. Though in that case, it took several months for a charging decisions to arrive. That case lacked the bystander's video of the incident, which this one has, Freeman said, as well as other evidence. He added that he was not insensitive to the riots and protests that have caused looting, fires and chaos across the Twin Cities since Floyd's death. But Freeman said his charging decision came when the evidence warranted it. We have now been able to put together the evidence we need. Even as late as yesterday afternoon, we didn't have all we needed. We have now found it, and we felt the responsibility to charge it as soon as we could," Freeman said. Included in the critical evidence to date is the bystander video, body camera footage worn by officers at the scene, statements from witnesses, and the preliminary findings produced by the medical examiner about the cause and manner of Floyd's death. Those findings indicate that the officer's restraints, as well as a pre-existing medical condition Floyd apparently had, and potential intoxicants in his system all appear to have contributed to his death. The charging document also notably states that Chauvin kept his knee pinned to Floyd's neck for nearly 3 minutes after he became unresponsive, even after a fellow officer, who was restraining Floyd elsewhere on his body, suggested they Floyd to his side. Here's what happened, according to the charging document filed Friday. After police were called to the scene on the reported counterfeit bill, they found Floyd and 2 others parked nearby in a car. 2 officers, identified as Officer Lane and J.A. Kung, approached the vehicle. Lane pulled out a gun, pointed it at Floyd, who was in the driver's seat, and told him to show his hands. When Floyd put his hands on the steering wheel, the officer reportedly returned his gun to his holster. Floyd was then pulled out of the car and arrested, at which time he actively resisted being handcuffed, the complaint said. But then he became compliant and walked with the 2 officers to a nearby sidewalk, where they sat him down, asked for his name and ID as well as whether he was on anything, and told him why he was being arrested. The tone shifted when they stood up and began walking him to a squad car, the complaint said. Floyd apparently stiffened up, fell to the ground and told the officers he was claustrophobic. That's when Chauvin and his partner, Tu Cha, arrived in a separate squad car. The officers reportedly continued to make several attempts to get Floyd into the squad car, but he wouldn't cooperate. Instead, he repeatedly fell down, said he wouldn't get in the car and refused to stand still, the complaint said. It was around then, while Floyd was standing near the car, that Floyd began saying he couldn't breathe, prompting Chauvin to reportedly go around to the passenger side of the squad to try and get him inside. Chauvin then pulled Floyd out of the squad at about 8:18 p.m. Floyd went down to the ground, face down and still handcuffed. The complaint did not clarify whether Chauvin took him down or went down on his own. Lane and Kung then held down his back and legs while Chauvin placed his left knee into Floyd's head and neck as Floyd continually said, "I can't breathe, please," and "Mama." None of the officers moved from their positions while Floyd pleaded, the complaint said. At one point, Lane asked, "Should we roll him on his side?" but Chauvin said, "No, staying put where we got him," the complaint said. Lane expressed concern about excited delirium, but Chauvin was resolute in their position, saying, "That's why we have him on his stomach," charges say. At 8:24 p.m. Floyd reportedly stopped moving, according to video footage, the complaint said. A minute later he stopped breathing or speaking. That's when Lane said again he wanted to roll Floyd to his side to check for a pulse, which couldn't be found. Nearly 3 more minutes passed until emergency responders arrived and Chauvin removed his knee from Floyd's neck, the complaint said. Floyd was pronounced dead at Hennepin County Medical Center a short time later. The medical examiner has still conducted a complete autopsy, but preliminary findings indicate it was a combination of the police restraint, Floyd's pre-existing medical condition, potential intoxicants in his system all contributed to his death, the complaint said. Floyd's health conditions include coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The findings do not indicate traumatic asphyxia or strangulation caused his death. In total, Chauvin had his knee of Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, nearly 3 minutes of which were after Floyd had gone unresponsive. Police are trained that this kind of a restraint with a subject in a prone position is inherently dangerous, the complaint said. Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington announced Chauvin's arrest on Friday following a news conference with Governor Tim Walz. Harrington said he learned of the arrest as he was walking out of the earlier media briefing. Reporters were re-summoned, and Harrington made a brief statement. During the news conference, Harrington, a former officer and St. Paul police chief, described Floyd's death as murder. "We'll call it a murder," he said. "That's what it looked like to me." Ramsey County Attorney John Choi commended his colleague across the river for reaching the lightning speed decision, saying it was what the community needed. He added that, in contrast to other officer-involved fatalities, including that of Philando Castile and Justine Damond, which took months to charge, this case lent itself to a faster decision. That's because those cases involved scenarios where officers claimed justification for their actions based on the law that allows officers to use deadly force when they fear for their life or someone else's. The person who stands accused here can't really use those defenses because you can't argue, in my opinion, that Chauvin's or the life of others or harm or substantial harm to him or others was present based upon the video, Choi said. That leaves the most likely defense the officers will mount to be that of causation, Choi said. In others, the defense that it was other factors, maybe Floyd's medical condition, medical drugs or alcohol, maybe something else, that caused his death, not the officer's actions. Choi also said he trusts that Freeman's office charged the case at the highest level it could for the time being, understanding that the investigation is ongoing and additional charges, such as second-degree murder, could come later. He added that he felt personally relieved that the decision came Friday, but that much work remains ahead for the community. My hopes is the violence and a lot of the things that have come as a result of the anger will stop and that all of us in our community can now try to better understand why the civil unrest unfolded, Choi said. I am sure there are people in our community who are very upset about the civil unrest, and rightfully so, but I think we need to work harder and reach deeper to understand and comprehend what is going on and why there is so much deep-seated frustration and try to see this from a history context about racism and the way institutions have been built and designed to negatively impact, especially African Americans, and other communities of color. I think we all need to reflect on that, and then we need to start rebuilding.